Imagine what the US, France, UK, Germany, and Russia would be like in human form. Throughout history, nations have been personified in art to represent their founding values, culture, and character. Here's how and why. These representations act like souls or spirits of the nation, embodying the ethos of a nation's origins and peoples. National personifications reflect those ideals that make Americans distinctly American, or Germans uniquely German. While many of these personifying symbols exploded in the Renaissance, Romantic period, and rising nationalism of the 1800s, others started much earlier. The idea of symbolizing one city-state or empire in Europe appears to have emerged coincidentally with Hellenistic Greece, most notably with the adoption of Athena, goddess of wisdom, warfare, and handicraft, as the patroness of Athens. Athena's origins as an Aegean palace goddess also gave her a natural association with the Greek urban life, the polis. Thus, she naturally became the prime symbol of Athens in addition to several other smaller city-states in ancient Greece. Likewise, other goddesses derived their names from the cities where they were worshipped too, such as the lesser-known deity called Thebe, who is worshipped in the Greek city of Thebes. Thus, the Greeks intertwined their religious imagery with their political symbolism, depicting at the same time who they worship and who they are as a people on their coinage, art, and sculptures. Rome continued this idea through the creation of the goddess Roma to promote a unified Roman identity. With the wane of Hellenism, a natural stopgap for religion was the state itself. The empire promoted this goddess to unify its peoples and communicate Rome's core ideas about itself. Roma was portrayed in similar style to classical Greek goddesses, but often with warlike emphasis including a helmet and weapons. Notably, her imagery sometimes included a dominant posture, standing tall over collected weaponry from her conquests to reflect the Roman state's military domination and protection. Her images appeared on Roman coinage, sculptures, and particularly at public events like games and festivals. When Emperor Hadrian built what was perhaps the largest temple in ancient Rome, he dedicated it to her, referring specifically to her as Roma Eterna, or Eternal Rome. Aside from these Greek and Roman examples, however, the history of national personification in Europe has been relatively scarce between the post-Roman and Renaissance periods, likely because of two reasons. First, the fracturing of Europe into many medieval feudal states seemed to emphasize allegiance to kings and nobles, rather than to particular cities or small states. Secondly, the Christianization of Europe displaced the popularity of polytheistic gods and imagery. Christ was assumed as the King of Kings, but more aptly here as probably the God of Gods. Likewise, the Virgin Mary and the art around her supplanted the age-old inclination for depicting the more feminine aspects of society. Thus, the classical gods and goddesses, though they survived in pockets around Europe and in ancient art and writings, slept for a time until the modern reawakening of them to serve as symbols of national character. As we'll see, nearly all the modern examples of national personification borrow from classical goddesses. Columbia emerged early in American history and became popularized during the American Revolution and subsequent Romantic era. The name likely arose from a weekly publication that used the name Columbia in a comic pseudonym for America. But by the time of America's push for independence, Columbia was adopted as a poetic name for America. For example, a group of Harvard graduates in 1761 composed the following poem, highlighting the new American name as a compliment to Britannia. Behold, Britannia, in thy favored isle, at distance thou Columbia, view thy prince, for ancestors renowned for virtues more. But Columbia became more than just an alternative name for America and evolved into the figurative spirit for the new nation. Often depicted as a classical goddess draped in the American flag and donning a Phrygian cap, Columbia embodies liberty, justice, and the pioneering spirit. In the 1800s, she was frequently portrayed leading settlers westward, symbolizing the idea of manifest destiny during the American pioneers' expansion toward the Pacific. Columbia was the central figure in American art and propaganda through the 18th and 19th centuries, before she waned in the early 20th century and was supplanted by the Statue of Liberty as the prime symbol of American freedom, and Uncle Sam, who really only represents the US federal government. Despite her relative decline in modern representation, Columbia still shows her face from time to time. Her most identifiable position today is probably as part of the logo for the film production company Columbia Pictures. As we'll find with most national personifications, Columbia clearly alludes to the Greek and Roman goddesses. Because one of the American founding principles was a radical ideal for liberty, Columbia draws on inspiration from the Roman goddess Libertas, usually depicted with a Phrygian cap and spear in hand. But Columbia wouldn't be the only modern personification to borrow from Libertas. Because the American and French revolutions occurred around the same time, France's personification in Marianne also derived from the same Roman inspiration. The French Revolution's upheaval of monarchical and Catholic norms coincided with a national ideal founded in minimally restrained freedoms. Marianne then became a symbol of freedom unimpeded by traditional institutions. Often depicted wearing a Phrygian cap, Marianne embodies liberty, reason, and the triumph of the French Republic over monarchy. She has been a constant presence in French political imagery, appearing on coins, stamps, and official documents, reinforcing Republican ideals. Across the channel, the name Britannia traces back directly to the Roman term for the British Isles. Even in Roman times, Britannia was personified as a lady reclining with spear, shield, and Corinthian helmet on Roman coins of the 2nd century AD. Charles II revived Britannia by depicting her on the pound sterling in the Renaissance, during which she emerged as a symbol of British strength, courage, and naval heritage. Lady Britannia, however, would trade her spear in for a trident to mirror the rise of the British Empire's supreme naval power, and illustrate a figurative power of Neptune passing to the British Isles. Often intertwined with these national personifications was the idea of female beauty reflecting the natural beauty of the nation itself. A British Renaissance playwright wrote in 1605, quote, "On a mount triangular, as the island of Britain itself is described to be, we seat in the supreme place, under the shape of a fair and beautiful nymph, Britannia herself." End quote. Moving southward back to mainland Europe, Germania personifies the Germanics and their various nations over the centuries. Her depiction is full of symbolism. The broken chains symbolize freedom, the breastplate with emblazoned eagle warn of the strength of the German Empire. The crown of oak leaves represent heroism. The olive branches intertwined with her sword signal a readiness for peace or war, and the rays of the rising sun herald the dawn of a new era for Germany. Her imagery draws heavily on the Greek goddess Athena and her emphasis on wisdom and warfare. Appearing first during the Roman era, she persisted throughout the Holy Roman Empire, but more as a regional personification that was still subordinate to the emperor, rather than a matriarchal figure for the broader empire. It wasn't until the 16th century that the Emperor Maximilian I reimagined Germania as the mother figure for the empire. She exploded in popularity in the 1800s, the heyday for patriotic symbolism, amid rising nationalism across Europe, and likely played a small part in the unification of Germany in the Second Reich. Further east, Mother Russia is depicted generally as more feminine and less warlike than the Western national personifications. Mother Russia is a nurturing woman, embodying the strength, resilience, and enduring spirit of the Russian people. Mother Russia uniquely draws little from the classical gods of Greece and Rome, instead adopting elements of Slavic folklore, possibly from the Slavic goddess Mokash, or from the agricultural-based inspirations like that of the Mother Earth concept. The image of Mother Russia has proven particularly unifying in times of conflict, notably during the Napoleonic Wars and World War II, where the Bolsheviks extensively referred to Russia as the motherland. There are plenty of modern examples of this type of national personification around the world, to the point where they do little to distinguish any unique national character. The vast majority of European nations use a classical female character armed with a weapon or symbolic object. What is less common is a national personification using a male figure. There are a few pseudo-examples, mainly folklore heroes or cartoonist inventions used occasionally as symbols of national identity and patriotism. Examples include the folk hero Holger Dansk, once a paladin of the great Charlemagne, as a symbol of Danish identity, Johnny Canuck as the wartime embodiment of Canada, and the little boy from Manly to refer to New South Wales and later Australia. South and Central America have not widely adopted the European personification of nations. Some nations such as Peru, Argentina, Mexico, and Brazil have adopted the idea of a motherland with depictions of female symbols. But many others in the region simply don't have a national personification, instead opting for terms and folk symbols that represent common citizens, like the Roto of Chile. Still, some South American nations like Bolivia use a female personification called Pachamama as a national symbol, a Mother Earth type goddess revered by indigenous peoples in the Andes. Across the Pacific, Asia is mixed in terms of national personifications. The Far East nations generally don't seem to connect allegorical figures with their national identities. China, for example, relies more on its imagery of dragons and various animals for national symbols, with no obvious, at least to an outsider's eyes, personifying figures. Some countries like Vietnam draw on historical figures or mythological gods and goddesses to use as national symbols. But in the same European sense of an invented figure used purely in allegory to the nation, there are few examples. The Bharat Mata, another type of mother goddess, appears to personify India in a reasonably similar manner, being born out of the Indian independence movement. There are many more examples and non-examples of national allegorical personifications around the world, but many of them appear drawn out of folklore and repackaged as a national personification, instead of being originally conceived as a national personification from the start. Contrast how Rome is both represented by Romulus and Remus, its mythological founders, and by Roma, the city's patroness in the more traditional sense. While Romulus and Remus represent Rome through association with its meta-history, the goddess Roma was intentionally distinguished as a symbol of Rome in her own right. Nonetheless, allegorical personifications are not limited to nations alone. Europa, a mythological Phoenician princess from Tyre, and the mother of King Minos of Crete, is the namesake for Europe. Unsurprisingly, Europeans adopted her as a personification for the continent. A similar form of European personification is in Europa Regina, the Queen of Europe, depicted as a woman superimposed upon some 16th century maps. Specifically, the Iberian Peninsula represents her head, the Italian Peninsula her left arm, Denmark her right arm, and the Eastern European nations her expanding dress. Likewise, Europeans quickly attached a female representation to the Americas upon the discovery of the vast and resource-rich continents across the Atlantic. The addition of an American continent, not distinguishing between North and South America, to European maps meant a fourth continent to depict in art and architecture. Europa was typically styled in queenly attire as the leader of the four continents. Asia was richly and exotically dressed as well. However, Africa and America were viewed as both strange and underdeveloped continents. Thus, their figures were half-dressed and wielded exotic props. These personifications represent something of the character and perception of nations and continents around the world, but not forever. Many of these examples of national personification have all but disappeared from the national stages. They may continue to exist in government buildings, occasional coinage, and some esoteric art, but on the whole, they have perished in the minds of the people they represent. The average American no longer knows or recognizes Columbia as his or her national patroness, largely because these figures change over time. Nations are not forever tied to one depiction of their national identity, rather they remake their personifying symbols in the face of new challenges. For instance, Uncle Sam became the face of America in time for World War I to galvanize men into a wartime footing. Likewise, globalization has led to a reduced appetite for nationalism, patriotism, and associated imagery. Ultimately, national personifications are mirrors,